here in my living room, about to read from two things. An email that I wrote this morning in response to a friend who has been alarmed about what he perceives as my gullible postings regarding Russia and my questioning the what I call the U.S. propaganda to try to get us to go against Russia and think that they are the enemy incarnate. So basically, he wrote me, and I find that I cannot read off of my, I can't do Facebook Live off of my MacBook, so I'm using my phone and looking at my computer. So if you see me looking away, this is what I'm doing. Basically, and I totally respect this person, so this is not about this person, it's just about what he said and kind of what set me off after this. He basically wrote, denial of the possibility and the history of targeted misinformation lets you live in your preconceived notions, assuming they have not repeated their historical behaviors in other formats. So I wrote back, and I'm just going to read you an excerpt of what I wrote back. In all caps, I wrote, "What about our historical behaviors? I was a history major at Wesleyan, and George Santayana said, quote, those who don't understand history are condemned to repeat it. It's one of my favorite quotes, and I use it a lot. So I asked him, have you studied the revisionist theory of the Cold War? I have, and wrote a paper on it. I urge you to buy and watch Oliver Stone's The Untold History of the United States. He covers it all. Truman broke all of FDR's agreements with Stalin in Yalta. He ousted Henry Wallace and listened to the neocons of the day and promulgated this false domino theory that Russia wanted to take over the world. They helped us beat Hitler, and all they wanted in return was their sphere of influence, because Russia has a long history, folks, of being attacked on their eastern borders, and that is why they were, creating the communist bloc. That is exactly what they want with the Ukraine. So we started the coup there, propping up a neo-Nazi regime just because they were against Russia. So I'm going to be posting some articles about where I'm getting all this information in the comments after this live Facebook video, because I want you to see these are not my ideas, they're others, the ideas of others. It's never been about democracy. It's always been about resources, mostly oil and gas. Our CIA overthrew democratically elected governments around the world starting in the 50s just because they had the temerity to want to nationalize their own resources for their own people and not let Western corporations steal it for a song. So we have long allied with the Sunni oil companies and used these terrorist groups for our own purposes. And there's a theory called blowback, which is that, we do these actions and then we are reaping the blowback from it. So we trained and armed Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan in our proxy war against Russia. We trained and armed Saddam Hussein in our war against Iran. There was no ISIS until we overthrew Saddam, with no plan for what would happen afterwards. We did the same in Syria and Libya, and now we're doing it in Syria. And these countries are all in chaos because of us, because of the U.S. So I'm not defending Saddam, Gaddafi, or Assad, but at least these are secular governments that kept Islamic fundamentalism under check, and they provide free public and social services for their people. I asked him if he realized that Libya actually had the highest per capita income of all the countries on the continent of Iraq, and that we deposed Gaddafi because he wanted to go off the dollar and the euro, basically to start his own gold-backed currency, because they had about $7 billion worth of oil there that they were going to use for the currency. So furthermore, I told him that I just came back from Cuba last year. I went on the trip with Code Pink, And all the propaganda they fed us about Castro in that country is wrong too. I noted that even though they only have one party there, they actually have democratic elections to be in the party on a municipal, provincial, and a national level. So, yeah, hi, Cindy. You were on the Cuba trip, too. I see Cindy Heil watching here. I have been stating to a lot of people that actually they have more democracy in Cuba than we do. And as the Princeton study showed, we don't even live in a democracy. We live in an oligarchy where the billionaires and the corporations basically control both our economy and our government. And this is something that Bernie Sanders knew and spoke about on the campaign trail all the time. So then I thought that I would read to you the remarks that I made last night at a screening of a film called Shadow Wars. It was the Los Angeles premiere of the film, and I ended up moderating the panel discussion afterwards, and I made some remarks because unlike most panel discussions that I've moderated, there was nobody there from the film. The director was not there, nobody who was in the film was there. There was a professor from Tufts University who had given them some advice about what happened in Africa that was used in the film, and my friend and colleague Chelsea Byers, who is an activist with Code Pink. So here are the remarks that I made. Let me begin by saying that I am not an expert in arms sales. Oh, the film, by the way, Shadow World, is about arms sales and how, and Chris Hedges, who is a great intellectual who I think very highly of, made the comment that perpetual war is fueled by these arms sales more so than by fighting terrorism. So, let me begin by saying that I am not an expert in arms sales, foreign policy, or the Middle East. I'm an activist and organizer who founded and led LA for Bernie now called Our Revolution Los Angeles, after Bernie's started an organization to focus on down-ballot races and the issues. And many people know that Bernie was here yesterday speaking on behalf of Prop 61, which is an excellent proposition we should vote for on the California ballot, trying to lower prescription drug prices. So, what attracted me to Bernie was his stance on the issues, specifically the issues that I have organized around, including the environment, income, wealth, inequality, and education. However, while I was always an informed person, I wasn't always an activist. And what woke me up after spending the 90s as a stay-at-home mom, pretty much, was the unease that I felt after 9/11 when Bush started making noises about invading Iraq. And something didn't add up, and of course later we found out that it was all misinformation, which all the politicians who fell for it hook, line, and sinker, by the way, called it the intelligence. You know, we had to believe the intelligence that we were given. Yeah, right. How come they couldn't, challenge the intelligence or do some of their own intelligence, which is what we ought to be asking them to do right now. So, I'm starting to feel that way again, and when the distributor of Shadow Wars contacted me to promote the film to the Bernie community here in LA, I asked him if I could moderate a panel discussion and bring up these issues, but I needed to bone up. So here's what I found, and it's quite discomforting. The U.S. government and the corporate media are engaging in propaganda right now to make the case for regime change in Syria. Only this time, because Syria's major backer is Russia, we are reviving the Cold War and risking turning it into a hot war in which nuclear weapons could very well be deployed. Here's what I learned. And I try to read sources that are not corporately funded and journalists, investigative journalists who have an expertise in the subject matter. So I'm just not believing things because they're in Breitbart or the Washington Times or the Daily Caller, which I've also been accused of. The first thing that they do when they try to discredit you, challenge your credibility, I do have a smartphone. I guess I need a tripod for it. Anyway, try to challenge your credibility is to discredit the sources. So, I basically said to him that, right now, when I quote Breitbart, the Washington Times, or the Daily Caller, it's because they're actually, not owned by the corporate media who are shilling for Hillary and have been this entire election. And I don't just quote when they do an opinion piece. I quote when they do reporting, and the sources are valid and can be fact-checked. So, although the corporate media speak of the siege of Aleppo, 600,000 people have fled East Aleppo, which is the area that the supposed moderate rebels control. Only 250,000 of the city's 1.2 million residents remain. 90% of the internally displaced people of the 7 million Syrian residents have fled to locations that are controlled by Assad and the government. So if Assad were killing his own people, why would they do that? Now, as I've said before, Assad is no angel, but he and Russia are really fighting the terrorists, folks, all the terrorists. One of the reasons Obama didn't go stronger into Syria was that we couldn't figure out who the good guys were over there. According to British investigative journalist Vanessa Beeley, who actually just got back from Aleppo and recognized that a lot of Western journalists are, reporting from Lebanon and other places. They're not actually in the war zone. She said there are 22 terrorist groups. She calls them genetically modified terrorist groups. I don't know, she never explained why she has that phrase, but she says they're all bad and they're all massacring people. So the ones we support and are calling the moderates are an outgrowth of al-Qaeda, formerly called the al-Nusra Front, now called the Syria Conquest Front. According to Beeley and others, they are using the 250 remaining civilians in eastern Aleppo as human shields, and we, the U.S., are propping them up. Aside from the propaganda about Assad, we are also being fed propaganda about an organization called the White Helmets. They are supposedly a voluntary humanitarian organization of about 3,000 operatives who have been shown pulling babies out of the rubble and doing other sorts of humanitarian actions. There was a Netflix documentary about them. They won the Right Livelihood Award, which is very similar to the Nobel Peace Prize. But journalist Max Blumenthal, who wrote 2 excellent articles in Alternet, which again, I will put these articles in the comments under this video, and Vanessa Beeley write that they are really not as noble as the PR campaign behind them makes them out to be. There have been photographs which show them executing civilians, dumping body parts into the trash, and parading around with an al-Nusra flag. Yet, they have received $100 million from the U.S., Britain, Japan, Denmark, Germany, and Holland. 23 million comes from USAID alone. Now, what would an all-volunteer group of 3,000 humanitarians need $100 million for? Beeley believes that they are setting up a shadow state ready to take over for when we finally topple Assad. And they have a perfect front because they're going in and out of Turkey, supposedly getting with these trucks and convoys of aid for which they could really be, smuggling in arms and rearming the terrorists that we are aiding. And there actually is a civil defense group there that has been in operation for 63 years, and we're not helping them. They're the ones that are recognized by the UN and the Red Cross and other organizations. So this is a new group. USAID supplies the White Helmets through a for-profit contractor named Chemonix, which has a $340 million contract with the U.S. government. They are a D.C. firm notorious for wasteful aid schemes in Afghanistan and Haiti. And if anybody's seen the film Clinton Cash, the entire second 15 minutes of this 1-hour film is devoted to all the money that was wasted on Haiti. They're actually needing, infrastructure projects for clean water and sewage because they don't have a modern sewage system, and people are urinating and defecating into the streets, and it's getting into the water supply, and cholera is rampant. But what did, the USAID and the Clinton Foundation do? They hired Chemonix, and they don't even hire, by the way, contractors who are in the countries. They hire these U.S. Contractors who donate to the Clinton Foundation. to build a cultural center and a sports center. Now, what do we need a cultural center? These cultural centers and sports centers are going completely unused right now, by the way. Meanwhile, people are dropping dead from cholera. So just a little tidbit on the Clinton Foundation. Anyway, they did nothing for Haiti, this group Chemonics, but their CEO got a $2.5 million bonus. And I think he donated $100,000 to the Clinton Foundation. I'm not sure of the exact amount, but you could check that out. Sorry about my coughing. The White Helmets are operated by the Syria campaign, which was funded by Purpose, a PR group affiliated with a global PR firm called Avaz. Now, this was something that was very concerning to me because I've signed a lot of petitions by Avaz, and this is the first time I've heard them associated with anything nefarious. So I need to, look into this a little bit more. Anyway, Avaz was apparently instrumental in generating support for a no-fly zone in Libya. And now when you go on the White Helmets website, the first thing that you see is a petition to support a no-fly zone in Syria. So the Syria campaign is funded by a guy by the name of Ayman Asfaru, who is the CEO of a British oil and gas company called Petrofrac. He also funds the in-exile group, the National Syrian Coalition, which is set up to replace Assad. He is a major donor to David Cameron, the former Prime Minister of Britain, and he is poised to rebuild post-Assad Syria and reap big profits in the process. So what else can I tell you about that? Well, if you go to see the film Shadow World, which is playing right now at the Lemley Town Center in Encino, you'll see more about these arms deals and the politicians who have benefited from them, including former Prime Minister Tony Blair and Prince Bandar, who, of course, was a good friend of the Bushes and very much involved with Saudi Arabia. And of course, that the Saudi Arabians were behind the hijackers who flew their planes into the World Trade Center were all trained in Saudi Arabia and had nothing to do with Iraq. Okay, so we know the CIA was engaged in many efforts to overthrow democratically elected leaders whose only crime was they wanted to nationalize the resources to benefit their people as opposed to foreign corporations, as I mentioned earlier. And I've learned in my research that the CIA has led an effort since 1949 to overthrow the secular Syrian government, to install a fundamentalist Sunni pro-Saudi government to enable Saudi's oil and Qatar's gas to be pipelined through Syria into Europe to replace the oil that the Europeans now get from Russia. So this is all part of this big, geopolitical game that we play with Russia and China now. So if you look deeply enough, you'll find that it's always about resources that corporations can benefit from, usually oil and gas. And of course, the U.S. doesn't like it when Russia impedes our imperialistic corporatist aims. So now we are demonizing Russia. You might have heard NBC last night dutifully report on the nightly news that we are looking into engaging into a cyber war with Russia because, as you know, they're trying to tell us that it was Russia that was behind the hacks into the emails, the Podesta emails, and, they're trying to influence the election. And everybody's getting distracted with this as opposed to the content of the emails, which are basically proving everything that we've known and said about Hillary Clinton for a long time. So what was interesting was at the end of this NBC report last night, they were saying that Obama right now is resisting this, or there's elements in the Obama administration who are resisting this. So of course they're floating this to the American people to build up a case so that any anti-war tendencies which Obama has, and I do believe that he did come into office really trying to fight these imperialistic wars, and he was just defeated by the deep state, the military-industrial intelligence complex backed by Wall Street, which is really just too powerful to stop any presidents. And over the years, I was never a conspiracy theorist. I never really studied, who killed JFK. I saw Oliver Stone's documentary, of course, and promptly forgot about it. But, the more I've learned, the more I've gotten educated, I really do believe his theory that it was the CIA and Allen Dulles who killed JFK because he was trying to end the war in Vietnam. He did not want to engage with Russia. He backed us down from the Cuban Missile Crisis. He did not follow through with the Bay of Pigs. And as others have told me, he was trying to get us off, end the Federal Reserve. So, but that's just a little aside. So let me see. Also, people who know about the Ukraine coup said that we were the driving force behind that, not Russia. And actually, we aligned with a neo-Nazi fascist regime, propped up that fascist regime there, simply because they were against Russia. And again, the Ukraine is right on Russia's border. And as I mentioned earlier, Russia has a history of being attacked on its eastern border, and all they've ever wanted, having studied the revisionist theory of the Cold War, was a sphere of influence on their own borders. So, Hillary Clinton has called for a no-fly zone in Syria, as you know, which was an easy assignment in Libya in 2012. But a no-fly zone in Syria would involve at least 70,000 U.S. servicemen and would essentially put us at war with Russia. Just be a matter of time before we, brought in ground troops there. Because the Syrian airspace is guarded by the Russians, who are using the world's most sophisticated systems backed by their strategic nuclear force. So going with this policy would literally be playing Russian roulette with all of our lives. The problem is that the corporate press is buying into this propaganda and selling it to the American people. The Washington Post editorial page editor, who was actually the editorial page editor at the time of the Iraq War, so you think he would have learned his lessons, and New York Times' Thomas Friedman, who was also there shilling for the Iraq War, is basically beating the drums for regime change and not reporting how we are illegally mounting military actions without UN authority and without the justification of self-defense. And we are illegally supplying weapons to terrorists. So Wednesday, the U.S. officially entered the war with Yemen. As you know, that Saudi Arabia has been bombing them and have killed, let me see. So we launched airstrikes against the Houthis in retaliation for alleged attacks on U.S. warships, an allegation that the Houthi rebels deny. And L.A. Congressman Ted Lieu, who is my congressman, had tried to pass a bill holding up the latest $1.3 billion arms sales deal with Saudi Arabia, basically because of their campaign there. They've killed 6,500 civilians. So he wrote a letter to John Kerry saying that we should cut ties with Saudi Arabia because they are intentionally targeting civilians, or they're not distinguishing them between them and combatants, both of which are war crimes. But political scientist Charles Davidson, who just last week published a book called Shadow Wars, wrote that the U.S. entrance into Yemen was intentional to ensure that no one wins this war, that it is protracted, and the arms race keeps going, and the more dependent both Saudi and Iranian clients will be on their patrons. In Shadow Wars, Davidson contends that the U.S. has used Islamic extremists, like when we trained bin Laden and funded the Taliban in Afghanistan in the Cold War against Russia. And he said that even after 9/11, we continued to fund these groups while we targeted regimes that got in the way of Western investments like Iraq and Libya. Now, just the other day, the Prime Minister of Turkey announced that Turkey would leave NATO if Hillary became president because she wants the Syrian Kurds to break away and form an independent Kurdistan. And an independent Kurdistan would be a threat to Turkey. So many experts believe that the U.S. was also behind the failed July 15th coup to overthrow Turkey's Prime Minister Erdogan because after Russia entered the Syrian war, Turkey switched sides from supporting us and NATO to supporting Russia because of their economic ties with Russia. And on October 10th, Turkey and Russia signed a pipeline deal to get their gas from Russia through Turkey to go to Europe. So again, all about the oil. So what is the upshot of this? Well, in addition, in addition to all of the people who have been displaced, maimed, and killed in Syria already, and the very real threat of nuclear war, there is all the money that we're spending on war that could go into needed infrastructure and social service programs in the United States, as well as building our clean energy economy. The $340 million contract with Chemonics that I mentioned is in addition to the $1 billion the U.S. has already spent on arming and training the quote-unquote moderate rebels in Syria. Now, the total Pentagon budget for 2017 is $553 billion. This is half of the total U.S. discretionary budget, and it's 29 times what we have spent fighting climate change, which the Defense Department says is the biggest threat facing national security. And Bernie Sanders echoed that every time on the stump during the primary season. So really, what's the solution now? I mean, last night on the panel, I said at the very least, we should all be calling our Congress members and our senators and telling them to open up hearings into this and inviting these experts who are not affiliated with any organization that tends to benefit from, these wars. These are experts that, like I said, their journalism is in independent publications, Alternet, Common Dreams, different foreign affairs journals that I've never even heard of, and I will be putting them. Let's see, someone's talking about Venezuela here. Well, I guess you're all reading the comments. There's no point I have to read the comments. But I've, been very suspicious about what's happening in Venezuela. And I will say, though, that I think Hugo Chavez would have been smarter by spending his petrodollars, diversifying the economy. Because what happened was when the price of oil dropped so low, Venezuela didn't really have enough money to feed the people because they export most of their food. And I think we should all be, under the threat of climate change, we should all be growing our own food right now because this is going to be the problem. And why the Dakota Access Pipeline protests resonate so much with us is because they're saying water is life, you can't drink oil. And right now in California, we are actually fracking for oil. And we are injecting the toxic fracking wastewater into the aquifers. We did that 2,500 times. These are drinking water aquifers. And Chevron, which is one of the companies fracking for oil, is selling treated, quote-unquote treated, toxic fracking wastewater to farmers to irrigate their crops. Because we have a drought and they're not getting water, they're not getting fresh water. Of course, all the frackers have as much access to fresh water as they could possibly need, but the farmers don't have, fresh water, and they have been taken to tapping their groundwater, which is causing subsidence, which means that the earth is sinking, the water table is lowering, and this is a very, very terrible problem. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Oh, Jerry, yeah, my favorite governor, yeah, Jerry Brown, who calls himself a climate leader. And every time we protest him, we have signs that say climate leaders don't frack. So, yeah, the Ogallala Aquifer, which is the source of drinking water under the Great Plains, is also drying up due to drought caused by climate change. So we really are in a very dire situation. And all these wars for oil, wars for resources have to be stopped. We have clean energy right now. The costs of solar and wind have come down, and it is absolutely possible to have a clean energy economy. All you have to do is Google Mark Jacobson. He's a scientist up at Stanford who his organization is called the Solutions Project, and he writes country-specific plans, state-specific plans. He's done one for the U.S., he's done one for California, and it basically shows how we can be energy independent on, clean energy, 100% clean energy dependent on solar, wind, with a little bit of hydropower by 2030, if only we had the political will. So this is what we have to work on right now. We have to fight the extraction industries. We have to fight the banks that support the extraction industries and the wars. What we need to do is we need to build up a public banking movement in this country. I encourage you to go to the Public Banking Institute's website or read Ellen Brown's book. She wrote A Web of Debt and also The Public Bank Solution. We actually had public banking in this country when we were colonies. And these are banks where the money goes right back to the people. There aren't shareholders that profit from it. There aren't CEOs that take huge salaries from it. And right now, the only public bank we have is in the state of North Dakota. The state of North Dakota has a public bank, and they fund, they do what banks are supposed to do. Fund loans, small business loans, car loans, home loans. Right now, the big banks, and as you know, we only have big banks right now because like with every industry in America, we have consolidation and monopolization, and that's really one of the biggest problems. Bernie never addressed it, but if you look, there's 5 companies that control the media, 5 companies that control the airlines, 5 companies that control big food, and when you have monopolization, you don't have choices for consumers and workers. You can't say, oh, well, if you don't pay me more, I'll go get a job with this guy, or if you charge too much, I'll go buy it from that guy, because really there's only a few guys left, and they're colluding. I mean, the Justice Department, I think, is pursuing a case against the airlines because you'll notice that the price of oil has gone down from $150 a barrel to about $45 a barrel, and still the price of airline tickets are going up, even though they're squeezing more and more seats out of the planes and charging, more for extra things like, they're even starting to charge for check bags and food and, earbuds and movies and, premium seating, what have you, and they found out that they're colluding. They're basically saying, how about, Delta tells United, don't you raise your fares, and don't you lower your fares, and we won't lower our fares, and there's this tacit agreement, and everybody makes out. And credit unions are good, Al. Credit unions are good, but I just heard something about credit unions also having sales goals for their employees. As you know, Wells Fargo CEO just resigned because of the big scandal that they were having their tellers and all their employees. They set very high sales goals for them, and they were docking their pay if they didn't meet these sales goals and threatening to fire them. And really, Elizabeth Warren grilled John Stumpf. She did a great job grilling him, and she and Bernie Sanders have written a letter to the Justice Department asking that, not only this guy resign, which he just did, but that senior executives at this bank be prosecuted. And it's not just this bank, of course, it's other banks. And I did find out, had a 2-hour meeting the other day with a Committee for Better Banking, ACE, and the AFL-CIO. We're working on a big campaign here to target Wells Fargo in Los Angeles, and I suggested to them that we have the public banking as a solution. And actually, John Chung is very interested in public banking. He's our state treasurer. When I told him about this a couple of years ago, he asked me, well, Lauren, what would we fund the public bank with? Because the state doesn't have any money. We're actually running a deficit, all the sales tax that goes out as soon as it comes in, all the taxes. So I said, well, what about the pension funds, CalPERS, CalSTRS, the government employees, the teachers, pension funds? And he said, oh, well, the people that manage those pension funds have a fiduciary responsibility to the pension holders, and they need to make sure that they get a certain return on their investment. So about 6 months later, I saw the return on the investment for the state pension funds, and it was about 2.8%. And the Bank of North Dakota, actually, that same year, their return on investments were 18%. So I pointed this out to John Chung, and he all of a sudden took some interest, and now he's thinking about public banking a lot more. So where am I leading with all this? I'm getting tired of talking. I don't know how long I've talked, but if you have any questions that I can answer, leave them in the comments. I'll try to reply. I'll also put in some of these sources that I've been using. But again, folks, we need to remain vigilant, and we need to not trust the mainstream media and the propaganda that they feed us, because they're corporately owned too, and they're going to benefit from, this war, just like they're going to benefit from a Hillary Clinton presidency. And what more can I say? I'm going to vote for Jill Stein. I know she can't win, but I'd like to see her get at least 5% in the election, because she gets ballot access without having to, spend all this money hiring canvassers to get signatures so she can get ballot access. I think actually in California, I've been told all she needs is 1%. So really, Hillary Clinton is up 22% in the polls. This is the Real Clear Politics average of all polls, and this was done before the Access Hollywood tape leaked. So you can afford to vote for Hillary Clinton without worrying about, the orange clown getting elected or getting winning in California. And quite frankly, his campaign is imploding anyway, so I really feel even people in swing states should be able to vote their conscience right now. And as an aside, it's very upsetting to me how many liberals I know who are all, so concerned about Donald Trump's misogyny and his groping, and they don't seem to think a single thing about what Bill Clinton did. And I remember being around during the 90s and being very upset with all the liberal groups, including the women's groups, who were basically slut-shaming Monica Lewinsky. And also, let's talk about Joe Biden, because, they're talking about, the Supreme Court, we really need Hillary, because of the Supreme Court. Well, guess why we have Clarence Thomas? We have Clarence Thomas because Joe Biden, who was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee at the time, refused to call as witnesses other women who had been harassed by Clarence Thomas. They would have been able to corroborate Anita Hill's story, and there's no way that Clarence Thomas, who is as equally bad as Justice Scalia, would have been confirmed had Joe Biden, had he just called those other women. So we just have to be really vigilant, folks, and we also have to be make sure that our victory last year with net neutrality survives the court challenges, because right now all we have is the internet, and we are starting to see that Facebook is starting to censor. I know there's some other Facebooks that activists are going over to. One is called Mind, one is called MeWe. I'm thinking of investigating these things. Right now Facebook has us by the balls pretty much because we're all on here. So I don't know, maybe we can do a mass exodus pick a social media site that we can all, be on and keep this information coming. Because obviously the only way that Bernie Sanders did so well was because of alternate media and the internet and social media. Because obviously the mainstream media, first they didn't report about him at all, and then when they did report about him, they were disparaging. Remember, the Washington Post ran 18 negative articles in an 18-hour period. So I keep saying I'm going to stop, because I always have more things to say, but I am going to stop. And if anybody, I got a thumbs up on stopping. Oh, who did that? Anyway, I hope you all have a great weekend. What's going on this week? Anything that I can direct you to, activities? I don't know. I can't think of anything, but if I think of it, I'll put it in the Facebook group, Our Revolution Los Angeles. I hope you all join that if you live in Los Angeles, because we post about, we're not really posting at all about the election, because there's a lot of Bernie supporters who are supporting Hillary or who are supporting Jill or writing in Bernie, and we just want to stay away from that. We want to focus on the positive, what we can do. Oh, I know. We are looking for people to go to Monterey County over the next couple weekends before the election to canvass for the fracking ban. It's the only fracking ban on the ballot anywhere in the country, and the industry is spending heavily against it. We were able to ban fracking here in Beverly Hills. I worked on that campaign. We were able to ban it in Butte County, and now Monterey County is doing it, and this is really crucial because they've discovered a lot of oil under the Monterey Shale, and we need to keep 80% of the fossil fuels in the ground to avoid catastrophic climate change. So if you can go up there, they will provide you with housing for Saturday night and a nice community dinner, and they will send people out with you so you don't have to go on your own. What you need to do is write Ella T. Van from Food and Water Watch. Her email is etvan, ETEVAN@fwwatch.org. And I will put that in the comments as well. So if you can go up and do that, I did it in Santa Barbara a couple of years ago. It's a lot of fun. You really feel like you're doing something. You're making a difference. And we have made a difference in California. Just last week, or maybe now it's 2 weeks ago, we were able to stop the oil trains. You know, they call them bomb trains because when they derail, they explode. And we stopped them in Benicia. The city council voted to ban oil trains from coming through Benicia, and in San Luis Obispo County, the Planning Commission just voted to recommend to the Board of Supervisors that they also they also recommended banning the bomb trains from coming through that county. And we also closed down, as you know, I worked on this campaign a couple of years ago, closing down San Onofre nuclear plant. And Diablo Canyon is closing down too. So we're not going to have any more nuclear power plants in California. But if you live down there in the San Diego area, the Southern Orange County area, they are working to try to fight the plan by the utility to store the nuclear waste, which is very dangerous, on the bluffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean. And as we know, with climate change, you know, we're having more and more hurricanes and storms, and the bluffs are eroding, and they're doing it because it's a very cheap solution. I'm not up to date on what the movement wants as an alternative, but if you want to look into that, there's some very good groups down there. I'll try to put their links into, San Benito County voted for the fracking ban. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you sure? I thought it was Butte County. Well, anyway, that also can be easily fact-checked. So I am going to sign off, and thanks for watching. Please share this video as soon as I post it, and look for me to make some more live Facebook videos as soon as I have something more to say. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great weekend.